And if you think there's a player that you really think is one of those 5 to 10 players, and you're thinking about, oh, I don't want to take them because I'm going to have to overpay for them, they very well could be the player that could put you in the playoffs and bring you a championship. So don't be afraid to pay up for high quality players.
I am Garrett.
I am Brandon.
We are here to talk about GOATs.
So we're going to talk about, discuss, debate the greatest of all time,
Barry Sanders,
Etienne.
You're listening to the Goat Herders podcast, where we herd the greatest of all time.
Welcome back to the Goat Herders podcast. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Garrett. And today we're going to be talking about some fantasy football. Brandon's going to kick us off here. What strategies do you like to keep in mind as you're going into your fantasy football draft to become the top player in your league?
So I'm going to break down some mindset things for fantasy football. I have a few championships under my belt, so I want you to know that I have the pedigree to be giving you these tips and tricks for things that I've done over the years and noticed over the years of being fantasy football minded, and having done this for over 2 decades now. So my number one note on my mindset today is don't be afraid to overpay. And what do I mean by that? This can apply to either drafts or for auctions. A very few fraction of players always come out with lists of what players are like on championship teams and are in the playoffs. And there's always comes down to 5 or 6 players that are repeated throughout those. And if you think there's a player that you really think is one of those 5 to 10 players, and you're thinking about, oh, I don't want to take them because I'm going to have to overpay for them, well, they very well could be the player that could put you in the playoffs and bring you a championship. So don't be afraid to pay up for high quality players, whether that's drafting them early or putting a high auction value on them. Don't be afraid to really go after that player that you think is going to make you the champion for the year.
And these aren't the highest either. You're not talking like your top 5 QB. This could be a 5th ranked running back, a 7th ranked running back that you feel is going to have that breakout year. So we're just talking about going out and spending all your money on Dalvin Cook or someone, one of the top players on the draft board. This is who you're feeling a more like lower ranked guy.
Yeah, as you're going through your players, you probably can kind of pick out some of your can't miss players. And what I really want to encourage you is don't miss them. So if that means you have to take them a round or 2 earlier than maybe other people would be, or where they're showing up in mock drafts, if they're can't miss players, and there's probably only going to be a few of those on your draft board, don't be afraid to overpay for them, because they might be the difference between a championship and riding the 500 season. That's my number one. It's really important to seek those great players. Related to that, my number 2 mindset tip is to spread your bets. Be looking for a lot of high growth, but high potential prospects, and to really cast that net as wide as possible. Because again, if you're looking for a very small fraction of players leading to playoff runs and a small fraction of players of breaking out during a particular year, you want those players on your team. So you might miss on a couple, but you only have to hit on a couple of them. And if you hit on a couple of them, that could be the difference between you taking home the championship and not having a chance at all. So really spreading your bets and stocking up on potential breakout candidates.
Throwing some rookies in there is a big thing, especially on that one. That there's rookies that you don't know what they're going to do. They haven't proven themselves yet, but taking a chance on them, that's a big spot right there.
And another place to really look for them is oftentimes 2nd to 3rd year running backs. There might be backups right now, but the starter is kind of phasing out. They drafted them for a reason. And so they are the next big thing. Think Derrick Henry was behind DeMarco Murray. And it took him a while, but you want to get him on that breakout year because that's when everybody else is going to miss us. They're going to undervalue him, and you're going to get a huge overperformer that way. And the other place would be third or fourth year receivers. Receivers usually take a little bit longer to develop. And so looking at those and seeing what players have been around for a little while, they were drafted high, or they've really shown some promise at the receiver position, and to cast your net and take a couple of those and see which one of these might actually hit gold. And that's what you're looking for. It's widely known that third year receivers are a gold mine for breakout potential.
All right, Brandon, you said your first mindset was to don't be afraid to overpay for a player that you think is going to take you to the playoffs. Your second point was to spread your bets, to cast your net over a lot of players, and catch one or two that are going to be big breakouts that maybe weren't projected to be as high. What's your third mindset that you've got?
A third one is to not be afraid to look for some deep value. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that there are always a few players that will get kind of ignored for whatever reason. Maybe they're not a super popular player, or they're not like a sexy kind of pick. They're just kind of a boring pick, and people just pass on them because of it. And so looking for those options, you oftentimes will see some of those that'll fall through the cracks, and you can pick up a value a little bit later. So the other one would be injured players that are maybe injured in the preseason. There's some people who are unsure about them going into the season. If you have a high confidence in those players, you can oftentimes find some value there, as people are ignoring them because they're out for the first couple of weeks and they're concerned about them.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in on that one. If you are in a keeper league, if you're in a league that keeps the majority of your team, or even just a couple players of your team, one guy to keep your eye on is Travis, blanking on how to say the last name. And I looked it up too. Etienne. Sure. Etienne. I'm sorry. We'll get that corrected. He went out in the preseason. He is done for the year. The running back, the rookie running back for Jacksonville. If you are in a keeper league, he is someone to keep an eye on. If he drops down a little lower, he'd be someone to pick up for next year. He's not going to help you at all this year, but one of those like dynasty leagues, he's someone that is an injured player that could help you in years to come.
Yeah, exactly. Those are kind of those deep values that players that nobody else is thinking about, or people are overlooking for no particular like reason other than a short-term thing. And the season's a long time. So don't be afraid to look for those. All right, my fourth one is don't ignore top offenses. An example for this last year, I'm going to botch his name, but the Kansas City rookie running back last year, Clyde
EdwardsHelaire.
Yes. A lot of people, he was kind of one of those deep value picks last year, and I saw him dropping and I was like, man, I really should pick him. He's a perfect example of a do not ignore top offenses. Not a big name. Nobody was pegging him as the next great thing. But he had a fantastic year, and look at the offense he was on. It was an obvious pick when you look back on it. And this happens all the time. Going back to the Patriot days with Tom Brady, every year there was a Patriot running back that had fantastic stats. But people are always afraid to draft them, and they weren't sure which one. There was always receivers that were picking up some amazing numbers under Brady. So looking at those top offenses that you know are going to be top offenses, and taking players from those teams, because you could focus on a bad offense and hope that pans out, or go to a great offense where there's going to be a lot of points going around. And so it's a good place to find some surprising picks for sure.
All right, your final 2 points then?
The next one is kind of the inverse of the last one. Be wary of bad quarterbacks and bad defenses, and not bad defenses for your fantasy team, but bad defenses for your offensive players that you are picking. A classic example is you have a bad defense that gives up a lot of points, and you have the running back for that team. Guess what? Your running back even if he is an all-pro, fantastic running back, he's not going to get touches. And I have seen that happen time and time again, where a fantastic player just gets buried because their defense is bad or their quarterback is bad. And so a receiver, a fantastic receiver with a bad quarterback, even some of the greatest receivers will not perform with a bad quarterback. So be very wary of that. That could, a classic example from about 8 years ago is Demaryius Thomas was one of the best receivers under Peyton Manning. He was pretty good with Tim Tebow, but when Tim Tebow left, he was pretty good with Tebow. He was really good with Manning. Manning retired, and Demaryius Thomas basically fell off the fantasy earth. Bad quarterbacks. He had nobody throwing to him. He became irrelevant. So be cautious of those. And then my last one is kind of a tag on here. 5's a nice number, but being aware that if you picked a player, think about why you picked them, and don't be afraid to hold them for the long term. In the long term, in a short season, one season is maybe 4 or 5 weeks. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, I picked them because I think they could do something really fantastic. If it doesn't pan out in 2 weeks, that doesn't mean it won't pan out at some point. This worked out really well for me last year a couple times. It could have panned out really well with Philip Lindsay with the Denver Broncos. He came in, I think it was 4th or 5th week, and I had him on my bench and did nothing. And then I was able to slide him into my starting lineup. I very easily could have dropped him those first 2 weeks when he was injured. But I knew why I picked him. I picked him because I believed he was going to be a really strong player. Didn't pan out in the long term, and eventually I did let him go. But remembering why you picked them and not leaving people go too early, I've seen that time and time again, where owners get a little bit antsy and then they let go a player. I may have done this with Michael Vick when he had one of his best years ever. I had him on my bench. He wasn't starting. Turns out he was one of the top fantasy players of the year, and I dropped him in week 2. So hold on to those high confidence picks, even if they don't pan out right away.
All right, and there you have Brandon's 6 mindsets to keep in mind. 6 things to keep in mind as you're going into your drafts to become the champion in your league.
So just to wrap up, those different mindsets to review: don't be afraid to overpay. Get those great players. Number 2, spread your bets. Find those great players. Number 3, look for deep value plays. Take a few of those in your draft. Number 4, don't ignore those top offenses. You love Patrick Mahomes. You love those great quarterbacks and those great offenses. Find those players. Number 5, be wary of the bad offenses and the bad defenses on teams. And number 6, hold for the long term. If you really believe in a player, give them some time to perform before you let go.
And there you have it. You got Brandon's 6 mindsets for fantasy football. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Brandon. It's been the Go Herders podcast.